32,000 years ago, in what we now call the Goyet Cave in modern-day Belgium, the air tasted like frozen iron and old charcoal. It was the peak of the last glacial maximum, a period of history so brutal that the very concept of summer had become a distant, ancestral memory. Outside that cave, the wind was a physical weight, screaming across a landscape of permafrost where the only things moving were shadows with teeth. Inside, tucked away in the deep silence of the limestone, sat a skull. It wasn't human, but it wasn't quite a wolf either. It was shorter, broader, with a snout that suggested a subtle shift in the machinery of a predator. This skull, which, if we are being honest, looks like a footnote in the fossil record, is actually the most important piece of evidence in a 40,000-year-old cold case. For decades, we have treated the story of humans and dogs as a heartwarming tale of companionship, a lucky accident where a predator decided to stop biting us and start helping us. But when you look at the forensic evidence left behind in the dirt of the Ice Age, a much darker and more urgent mystery emerges. We didn't just find a friend in the dark. We found a loophole in the laws of extinction. The mystery we are investigating today isn't just why we have dogs, but the terrifying possibility that without that specific yellowed skull in the Goyet Cave, there would be no one left to tell the story of humanity at all. We were a medium-sized primate with mediocre senses and a desperate need for calories, standing on the brink of a world that wanted us dead. Here is the case for why the dog was the only reason we made it out alive. To solve this, we first have to investigate the most common theory, the lone genius myth, which suggests that some brilliant ancient human captured a wolf pup and raised it to be a loyal servant. On the surface, it sounds plausible. It fits our ego to think we conquered the wild. But if you look at the behavior of modern wolves, this theory starts to fall apart faster than a wet hide. Wolves are high-investment, high-risk predators with a social structure so rigid it makes the military look relaxed. Attempting to tame a wolf 30,000 years ago, which, as any modern biologist will tell you, is a recipe for a very short lifespan, would have been an exercise in futility. A wolf pup doesn't just forget its instincts because you give it a piece of mammoth meat. By the time it hits 6 months old, its predatory drive and its need to challenge the pack hierarchy would have made it a lethal liability in a cramped, stressful cave environment. The taming lead is a dead end. Humans didn't choose the dog. The dog, or rather the creature that would become the dog, chose a specific kind of proximity. This brings us to our second lead in the investigation, the trash eater theory. The idea here is that wolves simply hung around the edges of human camps to eat leftovers. But this doesn't explain the Goyet skull, or the dozens of others like it. It doesn't explain why these animals started changing physically. If they were just scavengers, they would have stayed wolves. Scavenging doesn't require a shorter snout or a broader brain case. It requires stealth and speed. Something else was happening, something active. Researchers like Dr. Gregor Larson, a leading authority on evolutionary genomics, have found that the genetic split between wolves and these protodogs happened much earlier than we thought, potentially in 2 different places at once. This suggests the partnership wasn't a fluke, it was a biological inevitability. But why was it so necessary? To answer that, we have to look at the suspects who didn't have dogs. The Neanderthals. For 200,000 years, Neanderthals were the undisputed kings of Europe. They were stronger than us, more resistant to the cold, and possessed brains that were, on average, larger than our own. They were specialized hunters of the most dangerous game on the planet. And then, around 40,000 years ago, right around the time those strange, shorter-snouted wolf skulls start appearing in human sights, the Neanderthals began to vanish. For a long time, the mystery was who killed them. But the forensic evidence suggests it wasn't a war. It was a caloric bankruptcy. A Neanderthal male required roughly 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day just to survive the European winter. And that's a conservative estimate. Some suggest it was closer to 7,000 during active hunting. That is a massive energetic tax. They hunted by ambush, getting close to large prey like bison and woolly rhinos, and engaging in what was essentially a wrestling match with a spear. It was dangerous, it was exhausting, and most importantly, it was inefficient. When Homo sapiens arrived on the scene, we weren't physically superior to the Neanderthals. In fact, we were fragile by comparison. But we had a secret weapon that didn't require our own muscles. We had a partner that could do the expensive part of the hunt for us. This leads us to one of the most incredible clues in the fossil record, the mammoth megacytes. At places like Mezirik in Ukraine and Predmosty in the Czech Republic, archaeologists have uncovered something that looks like a prehistoric industrial zone. We're talking about sites containing the remains of over 100 mammoths, with huts built entirely out of their bones. For a long time, this was a massive mystery. How could a small group of humans with stone-tipped spears kill so many of the largest land mammals on Earth without getting absolutely slaughtered? The answer was found in the teeth of the canids buried at these sites. Nitrogen isotope analysis, a technique that reveals what an animal ate over its lifetime, showed that these protodogs weren't eating scraps. They were eating the exact same high-quality mammoth meat as the humans. They weren't scavengers, they were teammates. Dr. Pat Shipman, a biological anthropologist, argues that this was the invasion strategy that won us the planet. In this partnership, the dogs acted as the finders and holders. They would scent a mammoth from miles away, something a human nose could never do, and then track it until it was cornered. Once they found it, they didn't try to kill it. They would surround the massive beast, barking and nipping, keeping it distracted and pinned in place. This allowed the humans to walk up and deliver the killing blow with relatively low risk. This changed the survival math overnight. Instead of a high-risk gamble where a hunter might die every time they needed to eat, the hunt became a calculated, high-probability success. The energy Neanderthals spent wandering the tundra looking for tracks was energy humans saved by letting their dogs lead the way. Over 1,000 years, that energy gap becomes a canyon. The group that saves calories and avoids injury grows their population. The group that spends every calorie on the hunt slowly flickers out. The dog didn't just help us hunt. It acted as a living, breathing caloric bank account. But there is a deeper, weirder clue in our own bodies that points to how deep this mystery goes. It's in our eyes. If you look at any other primate, a chimpanzee, a gorilla, an orangutan, you will notice they have dark eyes. Their sclera, the white part of the eye, is pigmented or hidden. This is an evolutionary advantage for a predator or a competitor. It hides where you are looking, allowing you to surprise your prey or your rivals. Humans are the only primates with vivid, brilliant white sclera. We have eyes that are designed to be seen. We are cooperative eye trackers, meaning we can tell exactly what another human is looking at from across a room just by the position of their irises. This is a massive vulnerability in the wild, unless you are part of a team that relies on silent communication. And here is the wow fact that anchors this entire investigation. Dogs are the only non-primate species on Earth that can spontaneously understand human eye tracking and pointing gestures. If you point at a bowl of food, a dog looks at the bowl. A chimpanzee, our closest genetic relative, will look at your finger, which, quite frankly, makes them a terrible hunting partner. This isn't something we taught dogs. Even 7-week-old puppies who have never had human training can do this. This suggests that while we were evolving to be better partners for them, they were evolving to be better partners for us. We were rewiring each other's brains in real time. Dr. Brian Hare's research at the Duke Canine Cognition Center has shown that dogs have developed a specific social intelligence that is functionally identical to a human toddler's. They didn't just learn to follow us, they learned to read our minds. This brings us to a biological breakthrough in the case that was only discovered recently. Why were these wolves so friendly in the first place? Geneticists like Dr. Bridget Von Holt at Princeton University found that dogs have a specific genetic glitch that wolves do not. They have deletions in a region of their genome associated with Williams-Beuren syndrome in humans. In people, this syndrome causes intense hypersociability, a boundless friendliness, and a lack of social fear. Dogs are, quite literally, wolves with a genetic mutation for love. This wasn't a choice, it was a biological pivot. The wolves that had this mutation survived because they could bridge the gap to the human camp. The ones that didn't stayed in the dark. But why do I say we would have died without them? Let's look at the climate data. Around 20,000 years ago, the Earth entered a period of extreme cold that turned most of the northern hemisphere into a dead zone. Resources were so scarce that human populations plummeted. Genetic studies show that we hit several bottlenecks, where the total number of breeding humans was terrifyingly small. During these periods, we weren't just competing with Neanderthals, they were already gone. We were competing with our own extinction. To survive, we had to move. We had to cross the Bering Land Bridge into the Americas, a journey across thousands of miles of absolute nothingness and lethal cold. If you look at the archaeological record of those first Americans, you find something consistent. They didn't go alone. They brought their dogs. In a landscape single where a single wrong turn meant starving to death, the dog's nose was the only GPS available. They could smell water under the ice. They could smell a herd of caribou 10 miles away. They provided the early warning system that allowed humans to sleep in a landscape filled with giant short-faced bears, bears that stood 12 feet tall and could run 40 miles per hour. Without an alarm system that worked in the dark, a sleeping human was just a high-protein snack. The dog took the night shift of human evolution. By covering the hours when we were most vulnerable, they allowed us to reach a level of deep sleep and cognitive recovery that our competitors couldn't match. There's also the matter of energy transport. Before we domesticated the horse, the ox, or the reindeer, we had the dog. They were our first beasts of burden. Excavations at sites like Beringia have found evidence of dog sleds and pack harnesses dating back thousands of years. This allowed ancient humans to move more gear, more meat, and more children than any other primate in history. It increased our range. If a human can only carry what is on their back, they are tethered to a small radius. If they have a team of dogs pulling a travois, they can move an entire village. This mobility is what allowed us to colonize every corner of the globe, while every other human species stayed trapped in their narrow niches and eventually died out. The case for the dog as a survival necessity becomes even more compelling when we look at the internal chemistry of our relationship. When you look into your dog's eyes, your brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone that is usually reserved for mothers and their nursing infants. But here's the kicker: the dog's brain releases it too. This is a cross-species oxytocin loop that exists nowhere else in nature. It's a biological tether. In the brutal world of the Ice Age, where trust was the only thing keeping a tribe together, this hormone helped incorporate the dog into the human circle. They weren't animals anymore, they were family. We know this because of how we treated them when they died. At the Bonn-Ober Castle site in Germany, a 14,000-year-old grave was found containing a man, a woman, and a puppy. The puppy was sick. Analysis of its teeth showed it had survived several bouts of canine distemper, a disease that would have been fatal without human intervention. The humans had spent weeks, perhaps months, cleaning this dog, feeding it, and keeping it warm, even though it was useless as a hunter. They didn't do that because they were bored. They did it because the dog had become a part of their collective soul. So let's look at the verdict of this investigation. If we remove the dog from the equation, what does the human story look like? It looks like the Neanderthal story. It's a story of small, isolated groups of highly skilled hunters who are one bad season away from total collapse. It's a story of a species that can only hunt what it can see, that can only move what it can carry, and that can only sleep with one eye open. Without the dog, we are just another failed human experiment that couldn't handle the energetic demands of a cooling planet. The dog was the multiplier. It multiplied our senses, it multiplied our hunting range, and it multiplied our ability to move. And then there is the psychological wow factor that most people miss. The presence of a dog changes the human fear response. When a dog is calm, the humans in the camp are calm. This lowered our baseline cortisol levels, the stress hormone, which has a direct impact on reproductive health and cognitive function. A less stressed population is a more creative population. It's no coincidence that the explosion of human art, music, and complex tool-making happened at the exact same time we integrated dogs into our lives. By taking away the constant gnawing fear of the dark, the dog gave us the mental space to invent civilization. They guarded the perimeter of our camps so that we could sit by the fire and invent the future. The case is definitive. The dog was not a luxury. It was a biological bridge. We used their noses to find our way, their ears to hear the coming storm, and their friendly mutation to build a new kind of social structure. We are a hybrid species, a primate that functions like a pack predator. Our success isn't ours alone. It is a shared victory. When we look back at the millions of years of human evolution, we see a long list of species that almost made it. Homo erectus, Homo floresiensis, the Denisovans, the Neanderthals, they were all smart. They all used fire. They all had tools. But they all lacked the one thing that we had, a partner from another world. If we look at the verdict section of this investigation, we have to admit that the dog is the only reason we are not just another collection of interesting bones in a limestone cave. They didn't just help us survive the Ice Age. They changed what it meant to be human. They rewired our brains for cooperation. They rewired our eyes for silent communication. And they rewired our hearts for a bond that defies biological logic. We are the invaders who took over the world. But we didn't do it with a sword. We did it with a whistle and a look. Think about the sheer scale of that for a moment. Every city you see, every book you read, every piece of technology you hold in your hand, and yes, that includes the screen you are looking at right now, sits on top of a foundation of mammoth bones and wolf tracks. We are living in a world built by a partnership. If that Goyet dog hadn't walked toward the campfire 32,000 years ago, or if those ancient humans had been just a little more fearful and a little less observant, the human story would have ended in the cold. We would have been a short-lived species, a strange blip in the fossil record of the Pleistocene. The case of the dog-human complex is closed. The evidence in the teeth, the eyes, and the DNA all points to the same conclusion. We didn't domesticate the dog to make our lives easier. We domesticated them because we were dying. They were the biological technology that allowed us to hack the environment. They turned the most dangerous predators on the planet into our most loyal protectors. They took the night and gave it back to us. And in exchange, we gave them a place by the fire that they have never left. Now, look at your own life. Look at the dog sleeping on your rug, or the one you see at the park. You see a pet. But if you look closer, through the lens of this investigation, you'll see something else. You're looking at the living evidence of a desperate, ancient alliance. You're looking at the reason you exist. That friendliness you see in their wagging tail isn't just a cute trait. It's a genetic key that unlocked the door to the modern world. Without that key, the door would have stayed locked, and we would have been left outside in the wind. So the next time you see a dog, don't just think about treats or walks. Think about the Goyet Cave. Think about the yellowed tooth and the screaming wind and the mammoth megasites. Think about the fact that 40,000 years ago, a predator made a choice that saved your entire species. And if that doesn't make you want to go out and give a dog the best meal of its life, I don't know what will. It's a debt we can never truly repay. But we can start by acknowledging the truth. We are not the masters of this world. We are the survivors of a partnership that we were lucky enough to be invited into. The case is closed, but the mystery of that bond remains the most beautiful part of the human experience. We found a partner in the dark, and together, we turned the dark into a home. It's a story that's still being written, one wag, one look, and one silent communication at a time. And as long as there is a dog by our side, the human story will keep going. Because if there's one thing the Ice Age taught us, it's that nobody makes it through the winter alone. To return to the Goyet Cave one last time. The place where this investigation began, take a look at that yellowed canine tooth again. When you first saw it, it was just a piece of old bone, a remnant of a dead animal. But now you see the forensic truth. That tooth didn't belong to a wolf, and it didn't belong to a pet. It belonged to a sentinel. It was part of the first line of defense in a war for survival that we were losing. The crunch of that frozen grass, the smell of the old charcoal, and that specific yellowed skull are the physical anchors of our history. That tooth represents the moment we stopped being just another animal and started being something new. It is a chilling reminder of how close we came to the edge. If that one animal hadn't stood between us and the shadows, those shadows would have swallowed us whole. The definitive argument for our survival isn't found in our weapons or our buildings. It is found in the DNA of the creature sleeping at your feet. Without them, the Goyet Cave wouldn't be a site of archaeological interest. It would be our tomb. That is the reality of our past, and it is a debt that survives every time a dog looks you in the eye and sees not a stranger but a teammate. If you found this investigation into our shared past as gripping as I did, consider subscribing. It's how we keep these deep dives into the human mystery going. And I want to hear from you in the comments. If you had to survive a week in the Ice Age, which modern dog breed would you want by your side to keep the shadows at bay? Until next time, keep looking for the truth in the dirt.